within one. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Okay. So please forgive me then for all of the mistakes I'm about to make. So it's on the recording. So the first thing that one of the things that I noticed as a somebody who's lived longer than the newest generation is that the generation gap is really big. And one of the biggest differences that I noticed is how people refer to their emotions has changed significantly over time, right? What I find now is that people are much less specific about their emotions than they were before. So it's much more common for people today to say that they're stressed when they're really anxious, to say they're anxious when they're really angry or are depressed, right? So the first step, I think, into managing our emotions is really being able to help people identify what are you experiencing, because language matters, because language transforms the way you think. The way that you think transforms the way that you feel. So being able to speak accurately about these things is probably the first step into really effective stress management. So let's define what stress is and what anxiety is, okay? They're different and they're commonly talked about as the same thing, but here's the problem. The treatment for anxiety and the treatment for stress, they're very different, right? So it's helpful to be able to distinguish the two. Now, I don't know if you find this interesting, but geeks like me kind of like this stuff. But if you think about our evolution, right, going way back to even before we were primates, right? Think way back to when we were maybe not even mammals yet, right? We had to learn to adapt and move to our environment, right? So once as an amoeba or whatever long time ago creature that we were, and we were kind of moving around, bumping into things, we needed to have senses, right? And one of the basic senses that organisms has is the ability to detect pressure. Okay, that I can feel my body bumping up against something else, and that creates a nervous system response, right? But what happens is that as we became more advanced species and we began to socialize, our brains took those very old senses, like pressure senses, and they repurposed them to create our emotions. So why do I say that? Because emotions are very fundamental. They are real physical experiences that we have. So the same sensors let's say if I were to step on your foot and you were to feel pressure, the same experience of me stepping on your foot is what it's like to be under a lot of stress, under a lot of pressure, right? And people will commonly say, I have a lot of pressure right now. It is the same sensors that give you the experience of somebody stepping on your foot as to I'm overwhelmed with stress. Okay, think about that for a second, because stress is real. It's a physical experience that we have. It's not just a hypothetical thing that came out. Evolution has transformed physical sense into emotional sense. And so from that perspective, if somebody is stepping on your foot, what do you think you should do? The natural human reaction is to remove your foot from the pressure so that you're no longer uncomfortable anymore, right? And so stress is supposed to have a response that's much the same way, but in social situations. So if I'm stressed out, basically your body is telling you that you're under too much pressure. You need to remove some of it, right? And why is it important to remove it? Well, we know for a fact that stress kills more people than heart attacks, right? And so the problem, I think, with a lot with our society is that we've come to live in a culture that tells you to ignore your feelings, right? And because we live in that culture, we are amongst one of the highest in the world of mental health problems, because we don't have a culture like that teaches us to lean in and to feel and to use our feelings as a very rich and powerful source of information, right? And this is also why I think it's important to know your culture, because many of us actually come from very wise cultures, that actually placed an emphasis on the feeling and the spiritual experience of things, which in my opinion is actually closer to health than a culture that kind of looks at categorizing things. Not saying that one is bad over the other. I'm just saying that each culture has its strengths and weaknesses. But when it comes to emotions, the Western culture is a little inept at dealing with that emotional experience sometimes. That's what we're learning. Now, stress. So anxiety, so stress is a pressure response. Somebody stepping on your foot. Anxiety is a newer emotion. This is not one of the basic emotions, actually. First, you had pressure and pain, right? Those were foundational sensory experiences. But then what happened is, as we became more advanced as a species, we had to predict, right? We had to look into the future and estimate what is the chances of success or failure based on a prediction of things, right? Which means higher cognitive functioning. So this is how it works together. You don't want pressure, right? So what happens is, in order for you to feel anxiety, get this, you have to have the ability for insecurity, right? So if you were an organism and you didn't have the ability to look at yourself and look at your vulnerabilities, you would not be able to feel anxious. But here's the good stuff, because if you are anxious, that might also educate you that you have a vulnerability that you may or may not have identified. And that vulnerability may or may not be accurate, right? So part of what I'm trying to offer you today is more than going on long walks on the beach and thinking positively. Think about using your stress and anxiety as an opportunity to inform wellness. If we can listen to what we're feeling in our bodies and think about, is our insecurity warranted? Now you have a solution. Because if the insecurity is the thing that you need to address and that's not truth-based, you can help to improve your anxiety. If you can help to improve your anxiety, you might make more informed decisions about how much stress is productive and how much stress is harmful. Okay? So let's make a distinction between stress and anxiety. Stress, a psychological, physiological response to an identifiable stressor. This is pressure-based response, right? So basically stress, you could have stress even if you have no insecurities. You could be the most competent lawyer in the world, but then you have 35 cases thrown at your doorstep. You're going to be stressed out. You know that you can overcome it, but it's going to be unpleasant, right? So stress does not necessarily always involve anxiety. It sometimes does, but it not always does. Now, anxiety is a fear-based response. So what happens is that anxiety has a natural reaction to get people to withdraw, right? To avoid. So anxiety is supposed to compel avoidance, okay? Anger is supposed to compel confrontation. You see that? We have these natural instincts that we're born with, and they're like stories that we have to play out. These are our instincts as human beings. You don't have to teach a child that if you smack their hand, that they can anticipate and be anxious that if they do something, they're going to get a smack, right? So the natural reaction is to avoid things that cause us pain or injury or disruption. Okay? So that is the natural reaction for anxiety. They're different. Okay? So stress and anxiety are adaptive. Here's the thing. We need stress and we need anxiety to survive. People that don't have the stress response make very poor decisions in life. People that minimize they call them Pollyannish. People that tend to delusionally minimize their anxiety, they also have very negative outcomes. The point here is that let's use our stress and anxiety to make us more effective at what we do. So let's look at how we do that. So here's a similarity between stress and anxiety, cognitive appraisal, okay? Cognitive appraisal means that your brain has to perceive that something is overwhelming for you. And then once it perceives that, it triggers the stress response automatically. The anxiety response is much the same way, that something is threatening to you. So it triggers this anxiety fear response to have you withdraw, okay? So healthy stress and healthy anxiety, here's step one. Step one is the stress, your anxiety healthy, or what they call eustress, or is it unhealthy stress and anxiety, right? So if your stress is not reality-based, it's not reality-based, that's unhealthy stress. If your stress is reality-based, thank goodness for your stress, that's healthy stress, okay? That's the first distinction. I'm going to try to help you to be able to determine if it's reality-based or if it's not reality-based, right? So some of you may have learned this in Psychology 100. We're going to talk about the gas model. Okay. Now the gas model was really interesting because we've come a long way since the gas model. And what we've actually identified now is that stress costs emergency room visits more than any other condition. Stress is associated with more money in healthcare than anything else. It's stress, right? So the gas model was created before people started dying in Japan from overworking themselves. In fact, they have a term for it in Japan of overworking yourself. And I want to kind of go over this because I think it's a pretty interesting basic model. This model involves alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. Okay. We were meant to live and thrive as hunters and gatherers. That's what our biology, our brains, we're supposed to live in about groups of about 150 people. So we find, for example, if you have a community of 150 people, you don't need laws. You don't need laws. You don't need formal policies because people will do the right thing because they care about their tribe. They care about the group that they're a member of. You don't even need laws. Once you get above 150 people, now we have to start setting social structures in place. So the idea here is that human beings are psychologically adapted to living in communities of 150 people. And when you have those communities, guess what? Nobody goes to the ER because they're stressed out. Nobody has anxiety problems. Psychologically, very, very healthy communities when you have those small communities, right? But then you look at America. Think about the community that you live in. Psychological problems, marital problems, substance abuse problems, absolutely, right? So if we think about this, we have to understand that our brains are not evolved to be well in the society that we currently live in. That's the thing that we have to think about. We're like aliens in our own society, right? We were evolved to get stressed out when we see a lion, to run away, to recover, and then to feel better, right? But when you think about this, how long does it take us to get a college degree? It takes years. It takes years. We are not designed to endure stress for that long. We are designed to endure stress just long enough to get away from the lion. But we live in societies where the average American at baseline is overstressed. Okay. So stress has alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. Okay. So at the alarm phase, let's say that you were driving down the pulley, right? And then you saw a cop like speed gun ticketing people with that laser gun that they have, right? Immediately your heart's going to start beating, right? You're going to have that initial reaction to a stressor, right? You might be anxious because now you think that you're going to get a speeding ticket. That would be alarm. What we find in alarm, if you've ever been in a very dangerous situation and things seem like they were in slow motion, like the thing about it is that it wasn't in slow motion, is that your brain was working so fast that the world around you was perceived to be moving slowly because your brain was pumping all the energy from your body to processing this threat. And that's what happens in that tunnel vision that people describe. So that's the alarm phase. But think about that. Aren't there benefits to having your brain function at that level of productivity? Absolutely, right? So we find that if people are a little bit stressed and a little bit anxious when they perform a task, they actually do better than if they are not stressed and not have no anxiety at the task. But we find is what happens is that because we live in a society where you have to be stressed out for years upon years, the body goes into resistance. So what happens at resistance is that hormones, as opposed to neurotransmitters, start kicking over. There's a difference between a hormone and a neurotransmitter that you might have learned in your psychology class, right? So a neurotransmitter is something like dopamine, right? That you do something, you shoot a hoop and you feel better instantly, right? A hormone takes longer to take effect, but it stays in your body much longer. Say, for example, your first crush in high school or whatever, and those hormones were ramping up, right? What happened is that you need to have hormones so that you can keep pursuing that love interest. Even after time goes on, the hormones stay in your body and it drives you to enduring activities, okay? So stress and cortisol is a hormone. So what happens is that there are hormonal changes that you will begin to notice when you start getting into the resistance phase, okay? The hormonal changes become extremely obvious in the exhaustion phase. In the exhaustion phase, basically your body is depleted. So what happens is that we have the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system, right? So when you get stressed out, the parasympathetic system, the calming system, kicks up because it wants to bring you back down, right? But what happens is that if both systems are both high at the same time, you end up not being able to sleep, but are horribly tired, right? You end up feeling agitated and jittery, but you can't remember a thing that you just learned because you're in exhaustion. Both symptoms are pumping at the same time, giving you that experience of uncomfortability, right? Now, in exhaustion, let me give you some other signs. Maybe that this will sync with you. You ever notice that when you were really stressed out, you broke out with pimples or oily skin? That's a result of hormones, just like you were an adolescent, right? And the testosterone's a hormone. It caused you to have oily skin. How about this? You ever saw somebody who was under a lot of stress and they have this lump on the back of their neck? That the fat just kind of accumulates kind of right at the lower part of the neck. Why do you think fat accumulates there in people who are chronically stressed? Well, if a lion was hunting you, it would make sense that if you had extra fat at the back of your neck, that's where lions bite you. That's where wolves will bite you, or mammals will typically bite that part of the neck. So if you were stressed out, your body thought that you were going to be mauled by lions. So it starts accumulating fat and to cover the sensitive areas of your body, right? Another thing, if you ever think about this, people who are really stressed out, both men and women will accumulate fat in their midsection, right? You'll see some people that they're skinny everywhere else under a lot of stress, and then it almost looks like a beer belly, right? So again, fat over there because those are where your vital organs are, so you could survive an attack. So your body doesn't know that you're stressed from school. Your body thinks that you're going to be mauled by a lion. Okay. So another tip is that if you want to lose weight and get healthy, stress is a great thing to target. It's a great thing, but hard to target. Okay, so here's what cortisol does. Initially, it has alertness, but then what will happen? It'll cause you to have weight gain, right? Stress is incredibly taxing on your body. So when people are stressed out, what do you tend to crave? Sweet, salty, fatty foods. A great thing to eat when you're stressed, well, not a great thing, a common thing for people to crave, ice cream and French fries, right? You think about it, what a wonderful, amazing combination, right? And it's amazing because it is so high calorie, right? Rich, that sweetness is used to make serotonin, which is a chemical. And then also the fatty part of it is used to make cortisol, right? So your body's trying to keep producing these hormones that is flooding your body, taking all this energy away. We talked about oily skin, gastrointestinal discomfort, sexual problems, anxiety, depression. All kinds of bad stuff happens when people are stressed out. Okay. So I want to give this other piece of information, and please feel free to ask questions at any time. Um, the thing about hormones is that they're really good at sustaining long-term energy, getting people's brain and body to function and endure long-term. That's what a hormone is meant for, right? Like sex hormones, right? Long-term. I've been biologically a male my whole life, and my hormones have made sure of that, right? So, but the bad thing about hormones and evolution is that it hasn't figured out how to identify what is causing us to be stressed out. Your stress does not have eyes, it doesn't have ears, it doesn't have cognitions. All it has is a physical response that your brain has to make sense of. So why I say that is because people like all of you and me, we are horrible at identifying and separating what is actually stressing us out. In fact, I'm going to show you in just a second how bad you are at identifying how stressful you are right now, how stressed you are. What happens with stress, because it's a hormone, is it doesn't get processed by one part of the brain. If it did, you could identify what's causing you to feel stressed out. Stress is a hormone that impacts all parts of your brain and body, right? Which means that the location, the cause of your stress is often going to be invisible. So rather than trying to identify what the major stressor is, you have to look at your stress as an accumulation. It's like a jar that gets funneled with stuff. at the end of it all, you don't even know what's in the jar, but it's building up, okay? So managing stress is not a quick fix, which is why it's hard. I've worked with people that were in exhaustion, that were so stressed out that they would urinate in their pants at work because their body was so overwhelmed and drained. Typically, single moms who are taking care of children and they're working all the time and they have family that they're taking care of. They're focused on everybody else. Meanwhile, their health is just deteriorating, right? And I would actually tell them that just like you would listen, if your doctor said you had diabetes and you had to avoid this and that, I am telling you that it is medically indicated that you cut down on your stress because it is killing you, right? Now, what I find with this population is that even when I allow them to shave off all of the stressors, they will tell me that it might take a couple of months before they notice that their body is starting to respond in a positive way. So it doesn't happen overnight. And this is why stress management has to start now. And you have to maintain it as a life practice rather than doing it only when you're stressed out. If you're stress managing when you're stressed out, it's too late. You have to stress manage before you're stressed out. Okay? I'll give you an example. So if you're there and if you feel so comfortable, I want you to take one of your hands, okay? And then what you do is in a second, I'm going to tell you to squeeze your hand like in a fist as hard as you can and hold it for 5 seconds, okay? So go ahead and start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let it go. Okay. So if you have no stress, what you're going to notice is that when you let it go, there is going to be a significant difference that you're going to notice between the tension in your hand and the release of the tension when you let it go. Okay? If you didn't notice something that was obvious, that you didn't notice the obvious difference between being tense and being relaxed, that's a good sign that you're overstressed. Right? So I just mentioned that we're very bad at identifying how stressed we are. So one of the tools that I offer you is that if you want to check in to see how stressed you are, do this test once a day at the same time, and you should be able to get a scale. You can rate it from 1 to 5. 5 meaning total difference. It was night and day between tension and relief, right? And 0 meaning you didn't notice any difference, okay? So I bet you that there are people that did that test that hardly noticed any difference. In fact, I would go as far as to say that most people here hardly notice a difference. That should be a good indication that we got to start making changes now. Let's get into the psychology of stress and anxiety. Okay. So people are not afraid of things that they are confident in overcoming. And I encourage you to take this part seriously because I care about your wellness. And I want you to make changes that help you to be well. And I've been doing this long enough to know that there's a lot of suffering in the average person and a lot of stories that need to be told. And so why I say this is I want you to think about something in your life that caused you a little bit of stress and a little bit of anxiety. Think about that for a second. I'm not going to have you disclose it. We'll make it really, really safe. Now, if there was a little chihuahua at my door, kind of scratching at my door, barking at me, right? I would feel no anxiety because I am confident I can overcome the chihuahua. I can play with it. I will talk to it, right? It's very cute to me. It doesn't threaten me at all, right? But if there were a grizzly bear outside my door, I would be horrified because my brain tells me there's no way that I can overcome that grizzly bear. Now, let's talk about you for a second. Maybe it was a test that you had at school and you felt anxious. But how often did you stop to think, what lie about myself might be causing that anxiety, and where did you learn that from? If you're feeling anxious about a test, where did you learn that you are incapable of overcoming it as if it were a grizzly bear outside your door rather than a chihuahua? The good news is that if you can identify it and you can be reasonable and rational about it, you can make that grizzly bear back into a chihuahua and then therefore be more successful in handling your stress and anxiety. Now, sometimes maybe math is just something you should be anxious about because you're not very good at it, okay? But maybe it's rooted in some lies about yourself, right? That maybe it's rooted in lies like in order to be smart or successful, you have to be good at math, right? Or maybe it's because you had a parent who shoved the times table down your throat and it made you feel like you were insignificant. So the test is a reminder of how insignificant you felt when you were a child, right? So I just offer you to think that. So don't waste an anxious opportunity to learn about yourself. When you feel anxious or stressed out, ask yourself, what is the negative message that I have about myself? Okay. So think about that for a second. This is how you do it. First, acknowledge your feeling, and then kind of think about your feeling and ask yourself, what negative belief does that feeling tell me about myself? And negative beliefs will sound like this: you're inadequate, you're not good enough, you're not worthy, you're not valuable. And then think about, where did you learn that? Because if you can go back to where you learned it, you can then begin to think, is that truthful statement about myself? Or was it because I was a little kid when I was learning math and I'm not a little kid anymore? Or is it because I felt like my mother and father didn't know who I really am, and I really wanted them to know me? And because they didn't know me, I felt like I had to do bigger and better things in order for me to be valuable. Oh, crap. I'm doing that in my marriage right now, aren't I? I'm trying to do more things because I don't want my wife to leave me, rather than talking about my vulnerabilities. These things can go on and on for days, but the good news is that you're worth it. There's no amount of insight that's not worth your time for you in your life. So here's common areas of stress. We got personal conflict, which is a big one. If you think about meaning, for example, human beings, see, people think that human beings live to be joyful. We don't. We live to have meaningful existence. We are willing to do things that are not pleasant, that are not fun, like studying for a test, right? So that you can earn a degree, so that you can contribute something of meaning. But here's the kicker. How can you have a sense of meaning if you don't have a people to share it with? Meaning is almost always connected to, what meaningful thing are you contributing as a legacy past the time that you're here on earth? Something that's permanent, because my life is not, right? And if you have insecurities about the way that you attach to other people, that is going to be a major threat to your life story. The evolution that tells you that not only is your life important, but it's important to pass something on to the next generation, whether it's in children or whether it's an idea or an institution, right? Or something, work. So think about this. Part of our stress in some distant way is rooted in the idea that you know that you're not going to live forever. That's why people go to school now. That's why you got to get it done quickly, right? Because if we live forever, who cares if you finish school in 4 or 5 years, right? But there's a timeline. Get married, have kids, do this, find a job, right? We do this because of our innate fear of death and our innate desire to pass something meaningful to the next generation. Okay? So here's my tip to you. Personalize your stress and anxiety. So this is what's different, I think, about what I'm trying to offer, as opposed to telling you to do deep breathing. Identify the stressor. Is it an internal or external stressor, right? Does your stress fall into healthy or unhealthy stress? Okay, so let's give this a shot. Okay, we talked about this a little bit. You don't have to disclose anything. I want you to think about a mild stressor. Would anybody like to share a mild stressor? I won't go farther than that. Okay. Well, if nobody wants to share, I'll share then. Or I'll give time. Okay.
Or a mild stressor?
Yeah, a mild stressor.